Hi, I'm Randy Nonnenberg, the founder of Bring a Trailer. This is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
Randy, welcome in. It's wonderful to have you on the program. Thank you for being with me and sharing the story of the cultural icon of Bring a Trailer. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm super excited to be here and talk about it.
I appreciate you being here. If anything defines cars and culture, I think BAT couldn't be any better. It couldn't be a better example. You talk about the cultural elements of it. It's been described as a cultural phenomena. I'm sure when you set out to do it, you never would have imagined that it could be that way. But here we sit today. Is it a cultural phenomena?
I mean, it's reached so many corners of the car universe, at least. What really surprises me is that now it's even going beyond the automotive space into places I would never expect to find it. People telling me stories of, I never thought I'd get into, having a hobby car or an interesting car, but BAT kind of broadened my horizons on that. And I hung around for a little while and used it educationally. And now I own a, Grand Wagoneer that my grandpa had, and I always wanted one, and BAT let me do it. So it's really the different slices of culture that it has tied into is really what kind of has been eye-opening.
No kidding. And let's start before we talk about the origins of BAT, I want to talk about your cultural home. You're housed in an old oil distribution warehouse in downtown San Francisco. If that's not dripping with culture, the offices are of this funky mix of hip and all the things that we would expect. But that oozes in and of itself, the cultural elements of BAT, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I don't really want to dig underneath the foundations of our place and figure out what's there under the loading dock or whatever, but it's got some neat, it was next to the old rail line in the industrial district of San Francisco. And yeah, it has some culture and some connection and some aesthetic sort of history to it. And we knew the building long before we got the chance to move into it, and actually knew some of the previous tenants and such. And it all came together and was sort of meant to be. So it's, nothing too flashy, but yeah, I think it's a 100-year-old brick building in San Francisco. There's not too many of those lying around anymore with all the high rises and stuff.
Yeah. And San Francisco itself has its own unique cultural qualities. If you're going to run something that is emblematic of cars and culture, it has to be in San Francisco, doesn't it? I mean, it can't be in New York City or Omaha. I don't know.
Oh, I would disagree with you there. I think there's a lot of people that think, why isn't, they would have thought BAT came out of LA, or would thought BAT came out of who knows where, Detroit, right? I mean, there's automotive
True.
centers. You have a lot of history with many of them. San Francisco has the innovation. San Francisco actually has some super unique elements of car culture that I love diving into. I mean, there were, just across the bridge, there were, GM cars being assembled back in the, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and that sort of thing. Things that people don't necessarily associate now that, tech headlines get everything for Bay Area in San Francisco. It's there was a lot of automotive activity. I love all the Shelby cars that were built in Milpitas, which is 30 minutes away, right? I mean, all the stuff that came out of the Ford plant there that went all over the world doing cool things. I'd love to buy a 64 Falcon, and those would have been built right in that, facility. So there's a lot of ties to Bay Area, but we have a staff of many enthusiasts and have been able to build the brand from there in a good healthy way in SF.
But people in San Francisco typically have different variants of cars anyway. I mean, you see sports cars on the road, you see classics, you see one-offs. It has this very eclectic nature to it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The little one car garages in San Francisco, you can't leap right to having a, Ford Expedition these days, right? A lot of those are still hiding weird MGBs and, old. When I moved to San Francisco in 2002, right? Like the guy 3 doors down had like a Lancia Fulvia sedan, like super weird, right? And you're like, what on earth are these people doing? And it's the kind of stuff that fit the culture and the parking limitations, right? And but it still had moderate weather. It never snows there, so it's sort of different than having a car in NYC. So yeah, car culture in San Francisco proper is one thing, and then the broader Bay Area is with the weather, sort of 4-season driving weather and different things breeds other car capabilities.
Well, you grew out of the San Francisco car culture. You grew up halfway between Laguna Seca and Sears Point. Your dad was into vintage racing. You had a wonderful relationship that came through that automotive enthusiasm, and you were close to a lot of racetracks. And and you saw this unique DNA that would kind of go through that area, whether they were American vehicles, British, new vehicles, trucks. But the racing element was the part that I think really drew you to the automotive industry. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. You know, the heritage and the racing, and then my family heritage, right? Nonnenberg, I'm German, and like I always loved German cars. And my dad had German cars ever since he was, in college and then all the way through. And so that certainly impacted me and my relationship with him. And that's what he always said kept me out of trouble, was that I was wrenching on cars in the garage, right? So that's what we would do together. And that, yeah, stemmed into, wandering the paddock at vintage races and going to SCCA events, and all as a spectator. We never really were behind the wheel, but we were always seeing so many cool cars and soaking up all that flavor of the different marks and the different styles and ages of cars. And I always loved that. And then I loved classified ads, watching them transact, right? I was thumbing through the San Jose Mercury News as a kid as my hobby reading, instead of reading my school books, because I wanted to know, what was for sale and what was going on, even though I didn't have a nickel to spend on them. So it was a fun business that really stemmed out of what I loved spending my time on, which was hunting around for fun cars.
15 years Bring a Trailer's been around. I'm sure you can't imagine that, and probably difficult to imagine the fact that when you're doing 50, 60, 70 different vehicles a day through the auction site, which, adds up to a whole lot per month, that you are now known as one of the largest auction sites in the world.
It's crazy to wrap our heads around that and figure out where it is and where it's going. And there's far more demand that we haven't even been able to accommodate, right? I want us to be able to offer this service to everybody who wants to use it. And we're quite a far way off from that, because there's so much excitement and demand around watching things transact and the results that it gets on Bring a Trailer. So yeah, I feel super fortunate for that. 2014 was the year that we started auctions. So we basically, from 07 to 14, built this community that was really excited about cars and cars selling and transacting them. But they would always, fight over the cars of who got dibs. And the best way to solve that, we knew all along, was a bidding model. So we built our own and launched it in 2014. So yeah, we've been going over 7 years now on auctions alone. It's growing from there.
Let's go back to that 07 timeframe. You're kind of sitting around with a friend of yours over beers one night, and he starts telling you, Randy, you're all over the internet finding cars all the time, and you're finding them for other people. That's all going to waste. All that research is going away. Why don't you just post what you're finding? And you started with kind of that notion of, well, let's start with one car and see what we can build out of this.
Yeah, it really started from that. And it was both that friend that ended up being a business partner, and before that, any roommate that I had, my wife, my buddies before I was married, different stuff. They're like, why are you hunting around for all these cars? Right. And like, why are you up at, 1 a.m, like looking at Corvettes online that are for sale? And then you eventually get tired and you turn off your computer and all that goes away. And then you kind of do it again the next day. It is a head scratcher for most logical folks, but it just kind of came out of the passion of excitement of, that treasure hunting thing. We see that in a lot of areas, right? A lot of cable TV shows, a lot of, hobbies of what people like doing and hunting for things that are hidden out there. And for me, it was cars. And so a good buddy of mine that I had gone to college with was really savvy in the tech world. And actually, not just did he see an opportunity to publish it, but I actually helped him. His dad had driven a early Corvette when he was young, and he wanted to give a gift to his dad of reliving that dream again. So kind of one of the early prototypes of BAT was, he's like, hey, help me find a Corvette, right? So I found him several for sale, and we vetted them, and we talked about them, like you said, over beers. And that is kind of the prototype, right? A lot of people do that. They have like their car friend who will help them find the one or the right one, or guide them through the process of all the pitfalls that can be out there buying an old car. And so I did that with him, and he's like, man, that was so valuable. If I wasn't your friend, I would have paid for that. This is like your calling. And so we kind of started formulating how I could have an outlet and a channel for that, which ended up being sort of a blog format online.
And the first car, an Austin Healey 100 6 Roadster, and you posted it, titled it fittingly, "Starts and Drives." So the world was now open to BAT, but the model was simple. It was a simple premise, right? BAT was going to be filled with what one might call an obvious, in hindsight, hole in that enthusiast world. And you've once said nobody was finding great stuff and writing about it with a sense of urgency. We didn't really have an interest in buying a zillion cars and flipping them. We just wanted to talk about what was cool. And I'm guessing that was the only premise you needed, Randy.
I mean, that's what kept me going at night, right? Is watching what was out there and discovering something, and that adrenaline shot that you get when you say, wait, I found a Austin Healey and it's only 13 grand and it's 3 blocks from me, right? I mean, that's like for car people, that's a huge adrenaline shot. And you either want to go get it yourself, or you want to tell all your friends, or something like that. So yeah, in that one, you've done your research. That was the very first car, and it was a Healey. And I actually went and looked at it, because in the olden days, you had time to kind of go do that sort of thing all the time. And so I went and looked at it, and then I got home and obviously decided I didn't have 14 grand to go buy it, but I thought it was a cool one. It was on flat tires in one of these San Francisco garages. I remember it vividly. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just post the link and a couple pictures and write about it a little bit. That'll be the first one.
And you're not driving the market for particular models, right, Randy?
I mean, there's some models that are really in our sweet spot that now at volume, the way the auctions work, people are really looking at it for an indicator of the market. But I mean, the calling card of BAT has always been the variety. So it's not like we're a Mercedes specialist or a particular vehicle specialist. It's all over the map. So you can find real one-off type stuff on BAT that it's really hard to say what the market is until you put it up for live auction in a really efficient way. And then it kind of tells the world like, oh, interesting. This is what that one particular vehicle on that one particular day was worth, because a bunch of people fought over it. So auctions are interesting that way. And then our audience is also sort of an interesting indicator of that.
Well, and the audience helps keep everybody honest, which is what I find the most appealing about this, Randy. So you can't lie about a particular vehicle that's on here, because you use the example of the most wonderful Morgan ever for sale, right? And you put that hype on there, you're going to get 50 Morgan lifestyle enthusiasts who judge what you're saying. So there's no embellishment going on here. This is the real stuff. These are, whether it's an unmodified Toyota Supra or a really clean Land Rover series or an underappreciated Alfa Romeo, right? These are vehicles that the community is going to check itself on, correct?
Absolutely. And I always thought that was important. I mean, you ask why BAT started. Part of it was always, just the well-deserved terrible reputation that car sales and frankly auctions have, of all the hype and all the flowery language and all the promises that may go unmet, right? And it was always really unnerving for me to sit in the audience of an auction, an in-person auction, and this thing is on the block for 90 seconds, and all this money is thrown around and all these promises are made, and then what happens, right? Does it like go behind the curtain and live up to the hype or not? So we wanted to build certainly more transparent and available and thoughtful way to do it, which would steer towards the truth, right? And I've always loved, under promising instead of over promising, and just sort of attributes like that. And so people say sometimes that the descriptions on BAT are a little dry, right? It's just the facts. It's not promising you the rainbows and the everything that's going to happen that we won't be there to deliver on. It's just, here's what we present in very honest form, and you guys can discuss it and then create a value for it. And for cars, I think that's really important. I think the reputation of the marketplace, the snakeskin shoes and the cowboy hat and all the stuff all the baggage in the car world of transactional car dealership models. It's been a rough go because there's been a lot of shysters out there and a lot of bad stories. And so we really wanted to thankfully we could build a product here and really tailor it towards truthfulness and transparency of info, which was really, really absent, particularly when we started and still is today. So it really stands out as different, in my opinion.
I like what you've said before. The way to keep the content honest and interesting kept the site honest and interesting. And also, these are all the vehicles these are the ones you wish you could have had, but you can't have to some extent. When we talk about scarcity in auctions, it's all about scarcity and urgency. Isn't that really what drives auctions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way you're going to get a bid activity in an auction is if another one's not coming right around the corner. And so, yeah, things that are one-offs, things that are specially prepared, things that have had the right people work on them, things that are, even down to the right color scheme or mileage, different sorts of details like that, buyers tune into. So once again, the ability to present that transparently. In the olden days, particularly online, right? You'd get 3 photos and a little bit of info, but you may not even get that real nugget of why this vehicle is special. So we just, the bar wasn't that high to just start actually telling people what's special about the vehicle, because people wouldn't do that on their own. And you can do that in a really matter-of-fact way. And it really has helped. I think it's helped both the buyer and the seller at the end of the day.
More people want to be on BAT than you can handle. You alluded to that earlier. How does that problem happen, and how do you get over that? Or do you even want to get over that problem?
Well, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, right? People always, I can't cry in my beer too much, or people, will smack me around, because we definitely have a great position that we're in, and we feel very fortunate. Too much business is a great problem to have, but yeah, at the same time, it's like a great restaurant, but there's like a line around the block, right? No matter how good your pasta is, if somebody's standing out in the rain and can't get in to eat it, they're not going to like you too much. So we certainly have our challenges. Most of them are technological, operational. BAT is still a very human process. Some people think it's, just totally, you list your car and it's on the website in 30 seconds and it's kind of like self-service, but we actually assign everybody that's going to list a vehicle with a human being on the BAT staff that helps them out, a specialist that sort of walks them through it, and is there as your advocate, as you're a seller. And so, as you might imagine, people that are looking to scale internet businesses try to take all the humans out of it as fast as they can.
A lot of AI.
Because that can slow your growth, right? But our growth has been steady, but not a rocket ship, because we still believe that sort of human element of it is really important. And that also differentiated us from what else you can do online.
And the whole world in the last 18 months, Randy, became enthralled with the online component, obviously because of COVID and how in-person auctions changed. What have you seen that's changed throughout the course of the last 18 months? And has the rest of the universe just kind of caught up with you?
Yeah, I mean, the COVID environment certainly was an interesting eye opener to watch what would happen. Everybody panicked at the beginning. Nobody can tell you that in the first 2 weeks of COVID, in that March time period, that they knew the internet was going to be really big. Even internet folks were scared to death because nobody knew what was going to happen. But it was really after that it settled, and people settled into a home environment of work, or some of the uncertainties started to slow down a little bit, and people got their eyes towards the horizon and realized, oh, wow, this is how people are going to transact things. They're going to do it online. And thankfully, we had proven BAT before that, right? I mean, we had done thousands and thousands of auctions before that, but I would say it was still 50-50. There were 50% of automotive enthusiasts and buyers and sellers that were believing it. And they're like, okay, this online thing is actually how it's going to work. And there were 50% that were like, this is a flash in the pan. People aren't going to trust it. People aren't going to be able to use it. People aren't going to be comfortable with, buying expensive things online. And then it kind of the rest of the world closed off, and it basically put a looking glass over our model. And everybody zeroed in on it and said, wow, this really is working. If you pay attention, wow, these, 6-digit cars are actually transacting every day on Bring a Trailer. This is crazy. And so we saw in the early months, call it spring and summer of 2020, and the submission rates, everybody started submitting their car. It just actually became untenable. It was absolutely crazy. Everybody didn't see other avenues as viable any longer, or they were at least on pause, if not gone for good. And so people started submitting to BAT. So we saw the demand for our product really ramp up. And then people had time to be watching their screens and their phones more of what cars were transacting on BAT. So the audience followed accordingly. And
then the microchip shortage, which fueled all kinds of used car sales. I mean, the bottom line is you couldn't go buy a new car. You still can't go buy a new car that you want right now. I imagine that changed for you as much as anything else, or
That
accelerated it.
that was a component. The interesting part there is people often asked, and this was before COVID, and then during COVID, and then the chip shortage. People have asked, like, what's a BAT car? What is your sweet spot? You kind of alluded to that at the beginning. And at first it was like, oh, is this like a place to buy a 1960s Italian car, sort of, like an old trophy type car? But we were surprised even before COVID that the people that adopted a very forward thinking sort of model of using BAT consistently started to want to push the envelope on what kind of cars work in this model. And we were there as their advocate to very much want to push that model as well and be like, let's experiment, right? Can you list a 2019 Porsche Carrera on BAT, right? Which theoretically, there's one of those on a CPO lot not far from you potentially, right?
Exactly.
And theoretically, there's maybe one of those being privately sold or sold via car clubs or however those are sold. And so it wasn't, and it worked. The bottom line there is it worked on modern cars, and then it worked more and more on modern cars. And so this isn't typical Camrys and minivans and real high volume stuff, but stuff, again, combining scarcity, which makes auctions work, but still a more user-friendly and broadly acceptable type of a vehicle than, say, a 50s Ford pickup truck would be, right? A modern BMW M4 with 10,000 miles on it. Like, can you sell that on Bring a Trailer? And we started to prove that you could. So that showed that it was more of a mainstream utility that we were offering. And so things like the chip shortage, people are like, wait, I don't need to buy a car new or even CPO at the dealer. Like, there's really good ones on BAT, and the photos are better and the experience is better and the seller is nicer, and I can have it shipped via their shipping straight to my door. It's like, why would I start doing these other things? So yeah, that became a real eye opener. And the chip shortage, I think, has opened our eyes to the fact that people are buying their daily driver on BAT, which is never something we thought they would do.
Wow. Does that portend that sort of trend going forward for you?
It does, but the stuff's got to stay special, right? We still get, a lot of what I would call very mainstream cars, right? Which are, I get that there's a shortage, but I don't think that just for the special factor and the eye candy element of what pops up in your BAT feed, if we flood it with, base spec contractor F-150 XLs on there, I think people are just going to be like, this isn't a fun special place anymore for enthusiasts. It's kind of almost more utilitarian, too utilitarian, if that's a thing. So we're still very careful about what we accept, and it's highly curated, but we like to push the envelope, like I'm saying. So yeah, crazy stuff gets on there from time to time.
What other trends have you seen that have surprised you? Obviously, we saw a bunch of Ford Broncos drop 2 years ago, and we saw a bunch of C10 Chevy trucks ahead of the new Silverado launch. What else has surprised you?
I think that there are interesting trends like that happen. It's interesting to see how manufacturers and OEMs are spending marketing dollars and how much they embrace heritage versus keep it at arm's length. And so sometimes we see it, yeah, like right now, Broncos are absolutely hot. Is that because Ford is spending dollars on the new Broncos? Sort of, but it's also because old Broncos are super cool, and those have been on the upswing for the last 4 or 5 years, right? So there's interesting things like that. I think, particularly during the pandemic situation, I think a lot of turned to sort of escapism a little bit. Like pictures of you in the middle of the desert started to be more appealing than it maybe was before that, when life was humming and, Little League was working and you were going to the office and, life was busy. But when you're sitting in your 4 walls and you've been there for a while, like what starts to sound appealing is, either sitting on a beach somewhere or blazing a trail across a vast tundra somewhere away from it all. And so adventure oriented vehicles, I think, became wildly popular. And we're seeing that now. You mentioned Bronco, but across anything 4-wheel drive and anything sort of freedom oriented is what people have been grasping towards. And that could be a muscle car, or that could be a Miata, right? But I mean, that's another reason that I think people really jumped onto our types of offerings, because they needed some adrenaline in their life. They needed some wind in the hair to kind of get them mentally through the last couple of years. So I think that worked to our favor.
Let's hit on a little bit of passion around culture. And I'll ask you a tough question. Is BAT a canary in the coal mine for enthusiast trends? Does it lead or lag the automotive passion?
I don't think that's a tough question. I think it definitely is right there on the edge. It's so rapid. The cycles are so rapid on BAT. You can spot a trend on BAT maybe almost faster than anywhere else, right? I mean, like, where else do you go to pick up an automotive trend? I mean, you can watch Instagram and see what people are, try to make sense of that world, or car magazines and media is flying at you all the time. But to see what people are actually wanting to pay for is a very different thing than what people just want to read about, right? So it's BAT, I think, is a fast indicator, right? Auctions are typically 7 days, so you can learn in as fast as 7 days like what people are after. And we try to be very transparent with data. That's another thing I always wanted about our marketplace, right? You go to other online markets or car dealers or big auctions, and you never know what happens, and you can't aggregate the data. It's really hard to learn, and it's all very mysterious. So we try to be very transparent with the data, so you can look at any type of vehicle you want and track activity on it. How many people are looking at all these listings? How many bids were there? What did it sell for? What colors bring more money than others? I mean, you can slice and dice and get really geeky on the data on BAT. And I love that. I've always wanted that to be the case. So we're kind of designing for our favorite features. And that, I think, that lets you identify trends earlier if you're willing to dig around.
You mentioned auctions and live auctions, and there's a certain circus-like entertainment value to the live auction, to the big auctions. What's going to happen to big live auctions in the future? And how much, I guess, related to that, how does BAT perhaps try to borrow some of those live event features and possibly bring people together in different ways going forward?
Good question. I love the community aspect of it. And honestly, I go to those big auctions and I watch them. There's some parts of them I think are wonderful and some parts less wonderful, but the entertainment component you can't argue with. And what I always wanted out of all of those was a real transparency and a fairness in terms of what they were charging and how things actually worked and the fees and that sort of thing. So we have always, thankfully, the internet, just like when people are ordering products to come to their doorstep, right? The internet can figure out how to make that very efficient and the fees very low. And so to hear, 12.5% coming and going out of deals like is too much for me to handle at those big auctions. I can't get my mind around spending that much going to the house, but on BAT, it can be much cheaper than that. So I like that, but I don't think they're going to go out of business. I think they may have to look at their fees that they charge, but it costs a lot of fees to put up the tent and the lights and the catalogs and the shiny activity and the free bar and all the stuff that they offer. And we're not really trying to replicate that as much as we are trying to show people that there's a different way to do that. So to your point, the connectivity, the social connectivity becomes the part that is interesting for us in terms of a challenge to tackle. And the way we're doing that is through events, different things that are opened up to you. If you buy a car on BAT, you get to actually use it and get invited to things and participate in the BAT community in a way that is really alluring and exciting to people. And I think that's going to be some of the fun parts of the future for the BAT community.
Well, in fact, you have the son of the man who launched the California Mille, the late Martin Swig. It seems natural that you could bring events like that into the BAT mix.
Absolutely. I love those events. I mean, there's driving events happening all over the US and the world. I just got back from one of my bucket list events in Italy where I was out driving an Alfa Romeo. I live for that stuff. And it's kind of BAT, a lot of the content on BAT, the rationale behind why you feature that Austin Healey, the narrative that I would sort of weave together was, buy this car and fix it up and go do something with it, right? That whole enabler of good activity and fresh air and getting out and using the cars is something I really believe in. So yeah, BAT events, we were already doing alumni gatherings, which we've done. We call them alumni gatherings, and we bring together buyers of BAT cars because there's something about, and you'll relate to this, seeing BAT cars on the screen on your phone or on your computer. It's cool. I mean, when there's 300 photos, it's pretty cool, but it's not as cool as somebody pulling up to your curb in one, and you get to climb in and, you know, feel the squeak of the vinyl interior as you slide in, sort of a deal. So letting people see the cars, some of the most invigorating BAT moments I've had is when I either discover a BAT alumni car in the wild that I saw online and I recognize it, or now with these events, you walk into the paddock at Laguna Seca and there's 150 cars that were bought on BAT that are all together. That's magic for me, right? The variety and the schizophrenia of all the crazy stuff we've enabled. I love that. So there will be many more of those in the future that we're excited about.
As a kid, you had Road and Track magazine pages hung on your walls, and you've said that it really helped shape your automotive passion. Next thing you know, you've got Hearst owning you. How's that changed things for you?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, the how close I am to Road and Track and seeing behind the curtain now is really crazy, because that was my dad's go-to magazine ever since I was born and before. You know, that he's had his subscription to that forever and ever, and I loved seeing that, as so many of us did as kids. Running to the mailbox and seeing what magazine would show up was a really big deal.
Yeah, I did the same.
Yeah, and it's really wild. Yeah, the way that the whole saga came together. Hearst, I have been involved with them now for a year and a half. We've had a majority ownership from Hearst, and they've been really interesting to work with. New challenges, new benefits, I would say. I love the automotive brands that they have. They have both Road and Track, and then they have Car and Driver and Auto Week as well. As you know all this, I'm kind of preaching to the choir coming from publishing, but they really have taken us and made us kind of our own little island to create our own destiny, right? A lot of people are like, oh, Hearst is going to ruin BAT. And like, you look at BAT now a year and a half later, and a lot of those people are coming back around. They're like, Randy, they didn't ruin it. Like, what happened? How didn't they not ruin it? You know? And I was like, guys, we got this. It's going in a good direction. But basically what we really needed, we needed some foundational support in terms of how we were going to handle this line of people around the block that I was telling you about. And we needed HR support. We needed finance support. We needed foundational operation stuff that's behind. We didn't need a new auction model. We needed business capability to be able to expand. And they've really offered us that while staying out of the way of the product and the community and the offering. And yeah, in the year and a half we've been with them, we've now almost doubled again in terms of our auction volume. So they're very happy with us, and we're happy to work with them.
Let's talk about a couple of things related to the auction site. The most interesting car that you've ever had at auction, what would that be, Randy?
Oh man, everybody says the most interesting stuff is non-car, like bizarro stuff, right? I mean, we listed a Sherman tank, right? We listed get a load of this. So we listed, I think it was a 1950. It was a travel trailer that had been restored, but restored to the hilt. This thing was 37 feet long, and one of these things you would have pulled behind, I don't even know what, in 1950, what would have tugged this thing around. Right. But it's sort of torpedo shaped, and it was this dark blue color, and the whole inside was done out in period correct fashion, but super high quality by like home restoration craftsmen and stuff. And it sold for $600,000 or something totally crazy in what I would have expected, but it was a one of a kind, right? I mean, we have crazy one of a kind, wild stories like that are listed on BAT almost every week now. And it's really fun to watch as a spectator, but it's also just neat to see these finding new homes and where that travel trailer is going to go.
Describe the people who often sell or who often comment. Who is that?
Man, I've met many of them in person. We have a purely digital relationship with many of them, and some of them are mysterious, and some of them are very chatty and want to be best friends. It really runs the gamut. I joke with my team, right? The people submit a car to sell. Some people give you 2 sentences, and getting info is like pulling teeth. And some people give you their entire life story about everything,
Sure.
the car and otherwise. And so yeah, so our staff's job can vary from person to person to person, but we get, some folks that just want to spectate. They have no interest in buying a car. They just really love being part of the community. We have these editorial stories and these almost, public figures or celebrities that have come out of the community that write for us now and invest in the stories that are on BAT. And some people are just there for that, for a feeling of connection in the automotive world. But some people on the far other end of the spectrum are power buyers and are building out a collection and want to buy a bunch of cars. But some people are looking for that one 63 Corvette in the right color with the right specs with the right price, and they're going to wait and wait and wait for years until they get that one. So as you found, I'm sure, with your guests and the car universe in general, it is all over the map, right? Bob Lutz is watching BAT, and like 17-year-old kids of friends of mine are watching BAT. It's like totally all over the map. And that's really invigorating for me. It's really kind of makes you shake your head a little bit and say, wow.
What's the reach of the audience?
The reach, I mean, there's numbers and there's geography. I actually love geography. There's
how far do you extend to?
Yeah. I mean, you look at Google Analytics, which is how we track things and how most people track things, and looking at the number of countries, being in the hundreds of where people are looking at BAT. And granted, we have our sort of core audience, which is in the US and Canada and Europe. But then wherever the cars go, right? I mean, we have a great success story on the site of a car that was purchased out of the East Coast that ended up in a collection in Hong Kong. And I mean, it goes all over the place. So this event that I was at in Italy, I get there and I strike up a conversation with this young, cool guy who's driving a Datsun 260Z. And that's kind of an unusual car for there. So I get a conversation go with him, and he's kind of cool. And so we started talking. He's like, oh yeah, by the way, I bought this on BAT. I live in Switzerland. I bought this on BAT. And I about fell over, right? Because I should remember all the cars on our website, but I can't do that anymore. I used to do that. And so he says that. And I mean, I'm in Palermo, Italy, with this young guy with his Datsun, and he's like, oh yeah, I bought this on your website. You should have known that, right? And I was like,
yeah, you know me, right?
It's all over the place, right? I mean, you can't really pigeonhole who the people are or where they are. The internet is really wild like that.
How about the priciest vehicle you've sold and the one that you've sold for the least amount?
Well, if you want to talk range, we've got the range for you. The prices, I think I can pull it up right now. I think the record holder is still a 300 SL, which was a really wonderfully prepared cars. These are in the pretty rare air of cars that have gone into 7 digits on BAT, which 4 or 5 years ago, we would have shaken our heads and said, you're crazy. Are people going to sell $1 million cars on the internet? And now I think we're up to, half dozen or 7 or 8 cars that are $1 million plus. A brand new Ford GT just sold yesterday for $1 million. Tim Allen's car was listed and it sold for another 7-figure car. So anyway, but the most expensive, I think, was that 300 SL, which is a solid one to have. And then all the way down, and I'd have to think of how low it has gone. There's been a couple non-running, like real derelict cars that were like, ooh, man, that thing, like, it's kind of rough when they pay $100 to list it and it sells for, $900 or $1,100. It's the value prop there on some of those we have a little more trouble with, but it's, I know of 1 or 2 Saab projects and things of that ilk that I think were sub $2,500. So we've run the range. No
kidding. Wow. And now you're seeing a propensity of 1980s and 1990s vehicles on BAT, vehicles that you and I probably never would have assumed that we would gravitate toward. Or that anybody would gravitate toward 30 years later. But this is a thing now, right? Especially among younger buyers.
Absolutely. I mean, there's interest all across the board. You never know. Like there's this funny saying that people in the car world are too attached to, which is like, what is collectible? That's a collectible car. That's not a collectible car. And I've always been of the opinion, like, hey, people get to decide whatever they want to collect, right? There's weirdos that collect all sorts of stuff all over the world. Like car people are no different. So if somebody wants all the Honda Accords they can get their hands on, like better off to them. Let them go do it. So we have people that are really interested in 80s and 90s cars. I don't think that was too much of a surprise, given that, yeah, I now drive my dream truck daily driver, which is a 94 Toyota SR5 4x4, right? It's like the one that was on, like I couldn't have when I was a high school 16-year-old, and now I can, and it's a $15,000 car, but for me, it's a dream vehicle. And I think there's a lot of people like that are interested in things from their youth that maybe they couldn't have had then. So there's some nostalgia, but there's also the other factor on 80s and 90s cars, I think, is the usability. Like these cars will have air conditioning that works. These cars will have cars that start every time. They have fuel injection from the factory. They are certainly more rudimentary than a brand new 3 Series or Tesla or whatever you're going to buy today. But they're almost like modern enough that if somebody says, hey, you want to jump in this, or do you want to go on a date in this? It's not the sort of emotional and logistical commitment that a 66 Mustang is or was, right? It's kind of a ready to go vehicle. You can throw the keys to whoever you want and it works, but it still has that design and nostalgic and aesthetic sort of flavor. So yeah, people love that with Supras and Preludes and Fox Body Mustangs. And I mean, there's all this stuff from the 80s, early Forerunners. Like people are paying twice what MSRP was on those back in the day now for a good one. That sort of stuff is, I think that's here to stay, and it'll progressively get newer and newer, right? When I was in high school in the 90s, a Boss 302 was a 20-year-old car. And now a 20-year-old classic is a car built at the turn of the century. So it's a different world.
You mentioned dream car. Do you have other dream cars?
Oh man, how long's your show? I don't know how long your show is, but yeah. The other question of what's a BAT car at the beginning used to be like Randy's hit list, Randy's favorite Google searches, and that's all over the map. And I've been fortunate to get to drive and own a good variety of things, but I still have ones that I'd love to have. I worked for BMW for a long time. I love early classic BMWs, coupes, CSLs, that sort of stuff. I'm super happy that now I have my hands on a couple of 80s Italian and French rally cars, right? Renault 5s and Lancia Deltas and that sort of stuff. Those are the plastic models that I put together when I was a kid. And now I have the real thing, and they're just as plasticky as the models were. And it's an interesting challenge keeping them running, but I'm having some fun with that. And then I've always loved trucks. So my first car was a Toyota Land Cruiser. So I still shop. Last night I was on looking around at Land Cruisers for sale. I could do that till the cows come home. And I love all that sort of 60s and 70s off-road vehicle type stuff, Jeeps and Land Cruisers and Scouts and that sort of stuff, which is really fun. So all of that stuff's on BAT, and it's mostly in one place now, but I still hunt all over for it.
Well, and the rare things, are you still shocked at the continual barn find discoveries or things that happen at auctions? Does that still surprise you?
I mean, every one of those is its own story, right? And what makes me happy is that they're still kind of coming out of the woodwork, and there's always going to be crazy stories that are out there. It's an industry where so many individual vehicles were produced of all these different makes and nationalities and eras, and there's so many that are out there. So people can feel like, oh, all the stories have been told, or all the Porsches have been restored, or, whatever, pick your narrative. And then some building will get demolished in, Southwest New Mexico. And guess what's in it, right? I mean, all of that, it's going to keep happening. It's never truly going to be over. And so that keeps some fun sort of adrenaline in the hopper that's always going to be there. And we see that in our submissions, but quite frankly, you see that in a lot of different automotive stories that come out of the woodwork. So it's sort of continually fun.
Give me a favorite story, Randy. And I think it's around the 1950s Volkswagen convertible that you've told before.
Oh, you like that one? I like
that story. Give me that story.
I mean, yeah, that one is, high on the list on BAT. So that story, we have these success stories that we say, right? Like when something transacts on BAT, one of my favorite thing is like, what's the rest of the story, right? Who was the radio guy that always said the
Paul
rest
Harvey.
of the story? There you go, Paul Harvey. So I always like hearing the rest of the story, and you never really get that in most car transactions. So on our site, we publish it whenever we can. And one of them was, you're right, it was a VW Beetle. It was red with a black top. It was late 50s, I think, maybe a 1960. And the story comes from the guy who bought it. It's just sort of a somewhat routine listing. It's a shot of this car in the driveway and some nice photos and just sort of a seller we hadn't heard of before, just sort of a normal BAT day-by-day story. It sells and a guy buys it. And then afterwards, the buyer sends us a couple photos. And it turns out that the buyer was the previous owner of the vehicle years and years and years ago. And when the seller presented them with the car, they met in person, and he wanted to buy the car. And the seller presented him with the car and handed him the key. He said he didn't need it because he already had the key. He still had the Volkswagen key from decades earlier. And he put it in the car and it opened and it started the car. And I don't know if he had been holding on to that key because he wanted the car forever and ever, or it's one of those keepsakes you keep in your drawer. But he went back and bought the car and didn't need the key because he already had it. And then he drove it away, which
That's
is
unbelievable.
Kind of a pretty wild story.
And that, as they say, is the rest.
That's the rest of the story, right? Yeah.
Finally, where does BAT go from here, Randy? We've already seen this meteoric rise. We're 15 years into that first night of beers and BAT, and then of course the auction business. But where does BAT go?
That's a good question. What I want BAT to be remembered for and stand for, as long as it possibly can, is just that we contributed to making these transactions truthful and easy and helpful to enable people to get into these cars and enjoy them, right? So as long as we can keep standing for that, if we can do that for 500 people a week like we're doing now, and ideally we could do that for multiples of that, but if we grow and get really big and we lose that sort of attachment to the truth and a contributor to positive outcomes, that's a bad trade. So I would want us in the future to do everything that we can, which we're doing really well now, I would say. And I want to make sure we safeguard that in the future of enabling these transactions for folks that you as a buyer, if you're going to jump on there and buy a sports car or a truck or a track car or a RV or whatever in the world you're going to buy on BAT, that you can just say it was a super positive outcome. And I had a great interaction with those involved, and BAT was the enabler of that positivity. That's like just something that the world sort of needs from a marketplace perspective, and from a advocacy perspective. And the car world really needed it more than anywhere else, just because of all the problems and between high fees and liars and sharks in the water and all the problems that it had. For BAT to be able to have that sort of positive effect, that's where I want it to go in the future. So that's not super specific on, everybody asks, how many cars are you going to sell? And, are you going to do, how many events are you going to do? And all that sort of stuff. And I tend to dodge those questions, because we've found over the last 6-7 years doing auctions that when you inject this level of transparency and helpfulness for buyers and sellers, like the line around the block gets crazy. People are so hungry for it because it's so different that
it's authentic.
That's where it goes. So we're just going to keep doing that. And I think that line's going to keep growing, and we're going to keep rolling with it. That's where I would think the future is.
You've been asked before what you do if BAT didn't exist, and your answer was, I do BAT stuff anyway. It's in my bones. Randy, thank you so much for sharing your story on cars and culture. You are cars and culture, and I really appreciate you being on the program.
Oh, it's so fun to be here and talk to you about it. I love telling all these stories. So I hope you have me back, and I wish you luck with the rest of the programs.
Thank you very much.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on Sirius XM Business Radio.